Hey, welcome back to Pluralsight. In this CompTIA Security Plus course, SY0-401, dealing with compliance and operational security, we're going to specifically cover in this module risk and related concepts. I'm your instructor, Christopher Reese. Let's go ahead and get started. Okay, in this module, we're going to talk about the importance of risk-related concepts. And risk and its associated forms is really the overarching concept of this module. Basically, how to either reduce it, mitigate it, transfer it, or simply accept what level of risk is there and move forward. So we'll talk about the various types, or the control types, being technical, management, and operational. We'll talk about false positives and false negatives. All right, here's an example of a sign. You never want to be a false positive. If you're laying in a hospital bed and you see this, you better hope that it's not a false positive, because otherwise it's time to take a dirt nap. So certain things we want to make sure we see all the time. Other times, obviously, there's controls and alarms that we don't want to see, and we'll cover those. We'll also talk about the importance and the policies in reducing risk. So such things around our privacy policy, acceptable use policy, security policy, things along those lines, things that we can put in place to make sure that everyone that works in our organization is on the same page and understands the risks and the tasks and the processes associated with each of these specific kind of codes of conduct, if you will. We'll talk about mandatory vacations, what they are, why they're important, in some industries more so than others, job rotation, separation of duties, and least privilege. Okay, some of these things kind of go together and overlap a little bit. Okay, we'll also talk about risk calculation, the likelihood of risk happening, the ALE, or the annual loss expectancy. We'll talk about the SLE, or the single loss event, and the ARO, or the annual rate of occurrence. These things kind of go hand in hand when we're trying to determine and assess what our likelihood of risk is and what the impact of that risk is going to be. Okay, so hence the next term, impact. And then we'll also talk about MTTR, MTTF, and MTBF. The mean time to recover, the mean time to failure, and the mean time between failures. Again, all of these things kind of factor in when we're calculating risk. And then we'll talk about some additional concepts and terms, such as quantitative versus qualitative, one where we assign a monetary value to our risk and one which we don't. We'll talk about the various vulnerabilities that exist, what is a vulnerability, and the threat vectors. Okay, it sounds real important. Sounds like, throw those terms around and you say, oh man, that guy's smart. He said threat vector. Well, it's not really that complex of a term, but it's something that we need to be aware of, especially in the security space. Okay, basically the threat vector or the attack vector, which way are they going to come in? What area of my infrastructure or my systems are really most vulnerable is really what that boils down to. And we'll dig into that a little bit more in just a moment. We'll talk about the probability and the threat likelihood, again, tying back into our threat analysis. We'll talk about risk avoidance, transference, acceptance, mitigation, and deterrence. Again, all things that I mentioned before about what is our tolerance for risk? What is our ability to either accept it and move forward, or maybe we decide not to do something. All right, we'll talk about what those mean. And then finally, the risks associated with cloud computing and virtualization. And then our recovery time objective and our recovery point objective, RTO and RPO. Very important when we're talking about disaster recovery, business continuity, things along those lines, because there are costs associated with all of these things, depending upon how long we want to back things up and how quickly we want to recover when some type of an event happens.